Hello and welcome to the Radio Academy podcast with me, Roisin Hasty. I'm back after finally being taken down by COVID. I think I've just about recovered. My voice, maybe is getting there. Just wanted to say a big thanks to Sam, though, for making sure that last week's episode still made it out into the world. Now that I'm back, though, we've got another special episode for you this week, following on from a Radio Academy event last Friday, meeting the team behind the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2.
We're building a shed. So we've got a bit of drilling going on here. I'm not sure how we're going to get it down, but let's not worry about that now. He literally put a shed up during the news. You were on a train, and I gather you just followed your father off it, did you?
Yeah, when we arrived, they opened up the great doors and the screaming and bellowing, "Get off the train, get a move on, be quick." At the head of the queue, the guards moved in, and some of them said to us, "You are here now in Auschwitz-Birkenau."
The microphone picked you up saying that was a very bigoted woman. Is that what you said?
I apologise if I've said anything like that. What I think she was raising with me was an issue about immigration and saying that there were too many people from Eastern Europe in the country. And I do apologise if I've said anything that has been hurtful, and I will apologise to her personally.
Someone has just handed me the tape. Let's play it and see if we can hear it.
She'll never have put me with that woman.
What did she say?
Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman.
They always managed to pack so much into that show, and it was so interesting to hear from Jeremy Vine, his editor Tim Collins, and producers Tim Johns and Alison McGarragh that we wanted to share the highlights with you here on this podcast.
We've got a sort of DNA of the show. You want to present absolutely the main news stories of the day. You also want that mix too. Very important, if you're bringing news from Ukraine, you're doing sort of domestic stories as well, and threaded through it just a real passion for the audience, real regard for them.
It's the almost that the trivial comes on with the same weight, freighted with the same sort of significance as the bigger stories. I can't, until you actually hear the show, that doesn't make any sense.
Big thanks to Paulette Edwards too for hosting the event. So let's hear what they had to say.
When I say that you're the best news radio show, do you gloat or does it worry you?
Yeah, we certainly don't gloat at all. I think it's always good that you never sort of rest on your laurels like that. And it doesn't make a difference whether we're a great big show, but it doesn't make a difference whether you're broadcasting to one or millions. You want to put the best show together that you can. We certainly don't gloat, that's for sure.
If I can ask you, Jeremy, as a presenter, people think, it's obvious what he does, but what do you think your job is as a presenter? What are you really doing?
It was so interesting to hear Tim talk about being editor there. I was just fascinated. The presenter's job is to be real. I had a call today from somebody. This is an incredible thing. And it was a mum talking about the cost of living crisis and how she deals with her kids and explains to them. And she said, "Oh, by the way, my oldest is actually at university now. So he's not a part of this. But he was born, Jeremy, the day you started your show." So I said, "You're joking." January the 6th, 2003. So I then messaged her offline and said, "I want to send him a letter." And I thought, it's really interesting. When I started doing this 19 years ago, I thought it would take about 3-4 weeks for people to get used to. Then I thought it might be 3-4 months. Then I thought it might be 3-4 years. Actually, it's probably about 19 years before people say, "Okay, right, this guy has now replaced Jimmy Young, and we're happy that he is who we thought he was at the start." So the presenter's job is to be real. That's all, I think.
So for you then, Tim Johns, what would you say your role is? How long have you been doing your bit?
I think I'm onto a decade in October, which is terrifying because it feels like about 3 minutes. My role, I'm a servant in the ranks. We've got an amazing, wonderful team of producers, and we all, broadly speaking, do the same thing. We have our little interests, our little niches, but we all pitch the ideas we're interested in. We all write the scripts, but the guests make the tea, do a bit of admin, do the boring stuff, like work in the studio, and all of us, from the most junior to senior, when the show is on, our focus, absolutely all of us, is on getting the best callers on air. So, yeah, I'm just a troop in our little army.
You do feel like important parts. There's obviously the cake of the group, but you also feel like, we've got a bit of jam here, a bit of cream. We've got the fondant fancy kind of topping. I've just made that up. Alison, where would you put yourself in that sort of cake description of your team then for your radio show?
That's a very complex question, which I will have to answer diplomatically. Possibly the flour, something plain.
But important, Alison.
But important, integral. No, I think, like Tim says, we all do the same job, but we all bring something different to the team, I think, as well. So we all have particular interests, as well as the sort of daily news agenda that we're sort of chewing over and digesting. I tend to, one thing that I love bringing to the show is really in-depth interviews with extraordinary people, and they may be people that you've never heard of, but they have something exceptional has happened in their life, and getting them to sort of share that experience and that story is really, something very powerful that I think we do very well on the show. So that's probably, if I have a key area, that's probably mine.
What would you say the brief of the show was, and your target audience, and how all that knits together?
Yeah, in terms of how we how we put together the news, we don't slavishly follow the news agenda. It's absolutely focused on what is right for a Radio 2 audience. So, if we've got a sort of DNA of the show, you want to present absolutely the main news stories of the day. You also want that mix too. Very important, if you're bringing news from Ukraine, you're doing sort of domestic stories as well. And threaded through it, just a real passion for the audience, real regard for them. And obviously, it's not a phone-in show. We do the items, but we have a very sort of big part of the program is audience feedback and audience interaction. And that's really in the sort of DNA of the show. There's some of the best stories we get, the best calls we get are from people who contact us. You'll be doing an item on, I don't know, some heating bills, and suddenly take a call from somebody who's lived alone on Dartmoor for a couple of years, so incredible things like that.
Yeah, I think my probable obsession is with the mix and with range. And range, I think, after a long time doing it, I think range is the key word, which is because on Newsnight, we just used to do like the Middle East and Belfast and serious, very serious stuff. Now we're doing a massive stretch. So today we do cost of living, we do the shortage of corn oil for cooking because of Ukraine, and then we do this town in Herefordshire, which has got they paid £100,000 for basically a new spelling of its name and a logo everyone's cross about. So it's the almost that the trivial comes on with the same weight, it's freighted with the same sort of significance as the bigger stories. I can't, until you actually hear the show, that doesn't make any sense. But I think, it's funny how our brains work. You'll have something very small happen, like that a guy frying a dolphin on the air, which he found on a beach, and he'd gone home, got a knife, hacked a bit out of it, taken it back, rung us up, and then cooked it live on the air.
To get the meat out of it.
And how much meat did you cut out of the dolphin?
Oh, a few pounds, yes.
Can I ask, are you cooking it now, Arthur?
I am just about to put it in the frying pan. They're sizzling nicely.
It's probably the most memorable item of the whole year. And so although we do want to make sure we do the important stories, and I don't even need to say what the important ones are at the moment because we all know, actually, we do need the dolphin as well. And our job is to find the dolphin in the everyday. It really, really is, because you won't really hear that on the Today programme, these other great shows that are much more news-based. And all I can say is that I think, after all this time, I think I've learned that we don't really have the stories the audience do. So I used to think that the news was what we tell them, and I now realise that news is what they tell us. And it's a great irony that the best interview ever on my show was actually when a listener rang up and berated me about my salary. So the best interview on my show was actually done by a listener, not by me.
Random small stuff, the quirky stories, the dolphin stories that Jeremy is talking about, and they're all part of the DNA of the show, really, and that balance that we're seeking, especially with news being so very serious these days, that lightness is really important. And we do, you know, there is an element of taking a story in and selling it. But I think anyone who works in radio, you have that radar, don't you, where you sort of think, yeah, I can really hear that working, and that sort of gives you the confidence to sell it to your colleagues and get it on air. And, you know, sometimes, obviously, as a news program, we're looking at the news, but often it's looking at the world around us as well as individuals. And often those quirky, sort of strange little stories just come from something we've seen or thought or heard in our own worlds. I mean, one that we did recently, if anyone who's got kids knows the song We Don't Talk About Bruno, which was like a massive hit. We couldn't get it out of our heads. I mean, my children were waking up in the morning singing it all day, and that became an item on the show. And Bernie, the producer, booked Justin Hawkins from The Darkness to come on and do a full deconstruction of this song and why it's so incredible and catchy. And it made a really fun, great piece of radio. And it's just an idea or a thought that just comes from around you and from life. So I think we're all doing that all the time. What could work, and it just clicks. I think once you know your show well, you get that sort of sixth sense for something that's gonna really fly.
Oh yeah, all of us all the time, and anyone who works on a similar show in the whole industry, I'm sure, has a notepad, or these days probably a note on your phone, right? I mean, you're watching TV, you're talking to friends, family, whatever. You can't get away from your brain going, oh, that could be an item. Write it down on your phone. And also just thinking, I always have a rule. If I hear something or read something that's just brilliant, even though it's not an obvious item, I'm like, well, how could it become one? Especially audio. If you work in radio, and especially quite an analog program like ours that's not massive on digital social media, we're very much like, you know, FM, DAB focused. If there's a great bit of audio somewhere, I always think, how can that become an item?
Moral issues, like when the restaurant massively undercharges you by accident, should you declare it? Things like that are really, really good to talk about. And the amazing thing is that the actual dragnet of the calls and the number, and I do a show on Channel 5, so I've got a comparison here. The Radio 2's ability to find an even better example than the one you started with is incredible.
Let's talk about the phones, because this is one that I find quite interesting. So how's that all going then when it comes to answering the phones and getting the right person?
The week before I took over from the great Sir Jimmy Young, who was 83 when he stepped down, by the way, in 2002. The then editor, Phil Jones, said, you're only going to get one chance to answer the phone, so you should do it this week. So I thought, well, come on, there'll be loads of chances. Literally in 19 years, I've never had a chance again to do what they do, which is to sit in the office and pick up the phones. And it was a revelation. And it's almost worth me taking a week off to do it, because that's where the action is. And I don't really understand what they do, but it's brilliant, the way they triage calls on the second floor. I think we're probably a market leader in it, because at every show is going to have a pinch point. So you could have 100,000 people ring. If you only got 6 people answering the phones, you're going to have that funnel bit, but somehow they get the calls to air. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, so the guests we set up, and that can be any manner of means how we get hold of them. So maybe people that we've seen elsewhere, maybe people we find on social media, maybe people we've sort of had on before. So generally with an item, we'd set up like 1 or 2 guests before. And then obviously you have sort of members of the public contacting us. So that's these days it's via sort of email and text, and anything that's as valuable as that, you really prioritize. So you cannot work on the Jeremy Vine show unless you place real priority on that, and you're able to, deal with kind of text and sort of calls coming in, emails coming in, and looking for stories. And we're looking for powerful personal examples of something, whether the story is a massive story or whether it's a small story. You're after people who are very good talkers. So let's say, for instance, you could do an item on, nurses who are burnt out within the NHS, so We might talk to a guest, maybe done a study on it, something like that. But then you get incredible volume of sort of emails and texts contacting the programme. And some of those people will invite on. People sort of write an awful lot in terms of testimony and things like that. And you give them a call, see if they want to come on, and then put them on the show. So it's something that doesn't sort of happen randomly. We do put an awful lot of time and effort into finding people who are going to be really interesting and engaging.
I mean, I think it's worth noting as well that with the pandemic, we did have to change the way we did things. So prior to the pandemic, all of our callers that appeared on air pretty much came through phone box. We were all there bashing the phones, talking to people, finding out their stories and getting them on. And we have had to slightly sort of change that through the pandemic. So people are coming in via email, and then we call them back and we chat to them. But we're just very lucky. We have a brilliant audience, and some of our listeners become friends as well, friends of the show. They become contributors. We know our listeners quite intimately, some of them. I mean, Jean Neal is a great example of that, a lady from Rotherham. Someone will correct me. She's awesome, and she's a lady who called in very, very regularly. And calls in almost like a sort of a show grandmother, and calls in to check up on us. But she did What Makes Us Human, which was our sort of philosophical series where people would be invited to write an essay about what they think makes us human. And I think possibly one of my favourite ones of that series of like 100 or more essays and interviews was Jean's, and she was just magnificent, and that's one of our listeners, and they are sort of the lifeblood and the life of the programme, I think.
What top tip you would share for working on a phone-in? One tip.
Know your audience, I think. Understanding what they're interested in, what works for them, and what they're going to respond to.
If someone new says, "Oh, I think they're a bit out there to go on air," immediately get your radar up and probably get them on air.
I will repeat something that the previous editor, Phil Jones, said, which is you can tell if someone's going to be good on the air from their answer phone message.
If you enjoyed that, then you might want to think about signing up as a Radio Academy member. For £3 a month, you'll be able to watch a longer video of that conversation and hear the team go into even more detail from our online event. We'll also have an ARIA special for you next week, celebrating the winners from the night who I'll be chatting to backstage. If you're going to the award ceremony, come and say hi. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening.